Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining in. I'm Sumit. I lead Give, which is India's largest giving platform across retail and corporate giving. And the topic obviously is one of those most common topics out there right now, yet one of the most confused topics. And hopefully over the next hour, we can contribute towards that a little positively, right? That's my hope. We'll have Alpan join us soon. But before we get started, it would be lovely if each of you can just do a very short introduction to yourself, and then we'll dive straight in. And most likely, Alpan will also be here by then. Yeah. Can we start with you, Shank?
Sure. Pleasure to be on the panel. I'm Shank Som. I head AI and data sales and solutions for TCS in India and Middle East Africa. I'm myself based out of Hyderabad, and I'm joining this panel from Mumbai. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Welcome. Ranjani?
Yeah, good to meet you, Sumit. Good to meet all of you as well, and a pleasure being here. I am the director for AI. I lead the global Black Belt team at Microsoft for India, ASEAN, and ANZ, like South of Asia. The primary charter we kind of drive as a team is to kind of make Azure AI real with our enterprise customers. So we get to work with our most cutting edge customers in that sense. I've been in the space of AI ML, I would say, for the last 20 years now. Very interesting to see how it's evolved and can't wait to talk more about it.
Hello, everyone. I am Sunita Sarauke. I am a professor here at IIT Bombay in the Computer Science Department.
Sunita, sorry to interrupt. We can't hear you very well. It's very faint.
Okay, let me try without the headphone.
No, you're still connected, I think, to the headphones.
Is it better now?
Yes, a little better. Yes, definitely.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I am Sunita Sarauke, a professor at IIT Bombay's Computer Science Department. I have been here for 26 years. I did my PhD long time back in databases, and I started working in machine learning like 25 years back across different generations of machine learning's popularity and trends and models. And I'm very happy to be in this panel and contributing to these discussions.
Awesome. We'll have Alpan joining us soon, who comes from Vadvani AI. He's the chief AI scientist, and they're also doing some really interesting cutting edge work across the development sector, right? So he'll add in that perspective. But in the meantime, why don't we get started? Very simple ground rules. Okay, Alpan's here. Perfect timing. Hi, Alpan. You're on mute.
Hello, everyone. Apologies for being a bit late.
No worries at all. And sorry, I think I have pinned you. Aparna, if you can just help with you adding. Perfect. Great.
Yeah, it's done. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. I'm glad it worked out, Alpan, and you could join us. If it's an AI panel, we have to run into tech troubles to begin with. That's part of the course, right? So we just went through a very quick round of introductions. So I would request you also to just give us a brief background into the work that you do, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Hi everyone. I'm Alpan Rawal. I lead the AI team at the Vadvani Institute for Artificial Intelligence. We are a non-profit and we develop AI solutions for underserved communities in India. We work in the areas of public health, primary education, and agriculture. And as I mentioned, our target communities are the underserved, mainly rural communities, as well as the urban poor. And our solutions are sort of custom made for these communities to create social impact at the ground level.
Awesome. Thank you, Alpan. So, just if you take a snapshot of this panel, we've got academia, we've got business, we've got the dev sector. But interestingly, we have practitioners and not just evangelists, right? And what I'm hoping over the next hour is that all of you will be able to help the audience get a more nuanced, real world perspective of what's really likely to happen in the coming years because of AI, especially for people who are in the bottom 50% of the economic pyramid. And in a country like India, that the gap the bottom 50% and the top 50% are fairly distant from each other. It's not a continuum, right? That's the larger perspective. But before we dive in, just a couple of ground rules. We have a limited amount of time, and I want to stay respectful of that. So I will take the liberty of time checking at the end of 3 minutes as we go through the entire discussion. Second, this is a CII panel, so please use your judgment in terms of steering clear of topics that you don't think would be appropriate. But that being said, we do definitely want to get into the specifics of what AI is likely to do for this country. That is very much, part of the agenda. So let's dive in, and I'm going to start with Sunita. Right? But even before we get to this topic, Sunita, I think it'll really help if you can address one out of syllabus question. How new is AI? Right? You've been at it for 25 years. We've given different names to this technology as it has developed over those 25 years. Are we seeing something fundamentally different today, or this has been a long time coming and therefore is something that we do understand fairly well, or at least the experts in the field understand really well?
So actually the whole neural network revolution has been around like for 50 years. But
I'm sorry, Sunita. Again, your voice has gone really faint.
okay. So
Yeah. I think you may need
let me
to be
try
just
to
closer.
speak.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, the whole neural network technology has been around for more than 50 years. And the main magic happened when scale was put to the to basically a high capacity network which can learn more and more as you provide more and more data. So the early generation machine learning models, they would saturate. Even if you give more data, they would not learn more. But with deep networks, you could have lot of layers and very high, depth. And then as you provide more data, you will memorize or, learn the stochastic patterns more and more. And that has been a recent phenomenon, I would say relatively recent, for the last 1 decade only, when people figured out, first because of the internet revolution, a lot of data started being available at scale, and then people came up with a few sort of ideas which allowed the networks to train in spite of being horribly non-convex. And third, the hardware guys gave us a lot of hardware and storage capacity, and the combination of these three factors coming together is what is new and magical about current AI. But in terms of core research ideas, they have developed over 75 years or more.
And now when it's time, when this has actually come of age, or at least reached a particular milestone where it's become usable by the average person on the street, right? We have got to that point. What does a country like India really need to look out for as this technology starts affecting pretty much everybody in this country, right? And what is in store? In your view, what do we really need to look out for? What do we really need to prepare for as AI becomes the next big thing in the world?
Right. Yeah. So, first let me try to talk about the positives, like instead of looking out for what can we gain. And here I'm going to distinguish between two kinds of modern day AI. One is the machine learning predictive models as used for, I would call, broadly sensing tasks, like digitizing documents, which is the OCR models, the ASR models, which help us convert audio to speech, or the translation models, or the models which help in medical diagnosis. These are what we would call predictive models, custom models, significantly smaller than current Gen AI models. And for many of AI India's use cases, these predictive models suffice. So suppose if you want to streamline the document processing in a government organization, you mostly basically need a very high quality OCR model along with a little bit of structuring and translation and other capabilities. Similarly, like you must have heard about how legal processes, companies like Adalat.ai are significantly streamlining courtroom proceedings using AI. And likewise, like, we can think of people with hearing and speech disabilities using AI models, which are again helping them sense the world. And these I would call them as predictive models. And here I see a lot of opportunity in a way that will be affordable for us, which will scale for the bottom 500 million. And that is what we should try to harness without that too much caution. I think we should just go all out for this custom application specific predictive models. And I see Alpan and you guys are already using such models, and several people are reporting instant success almost with such models. Now the second the second part of the game is the Gen AI models. And here, of course, that is what is capturing the hype and the imagination of people. But before Gen AI is used for centralizing tasks like remote medical services or education, or providing say counseling to our youngsters on career prospects, we have to be very, very careful. A lot of customization and monitoring and accountability is required before we deploy them at citizen scale. So I'm very much aware of my 3-minute time, but before you cut me off, I want to maybe stop here and say that I kind of look at the AI use case as kind of bifurcated along the safe predictive models, which are orders of magnitude faster, both for deployment and training and cost, and that we should go all out for. Whereas Gen AI, we have to be very cautious, very purposeful.
Thank you, Sunita. Very, very helpful. And I'm going to pick up that thread and go to Ranjani specifically for Gen AI. What's the future of work? Where is Gen AI likely to take us, especially when it comes to human capital and how that human capital is deployed in the economy? Because one of the biggest concerns out there today is, does this take away entry-level jobs for people who need it most, which has been a large challenge for India in any case?
Yeah, no, and thanks for the question. And it's a good topic to talk about, right? Kind of like a segue from what Sunita was calling out. It's been a space which has been there, but definitely transformed exponentially over the last few years, if you think about it, because of all the reasons she called out, right? Like data, compute, scale, scaling laws, in that sense. So I'll start from like maybe numbers first, right? So I think I was reading this report, Sumit, which called out that there's like around 1.7 trillion, which will get added to India's economy by 2035, right? Now, that's from AI specifically. But if you think about that upside, it's kind of gated almost entirely by skilling. And that gap, I think, is truly real today. And NASSCOM did this survey, right? They called out that, demand for people skilled in this is going to double. It's going to grow to like 1.25 million or something like that by 2027, right? Having said that, I still feel that, and there are reports which cite that, a lot of employers still call out that the relevant application volume is quite low, and half of them have a skills mismatch. So I think that's the reality, right? Now, if you think about India as a market, and again, and we work with enterprises across, I think India adopts like a barbell. You definitely have an extreme set of customers on the right who do like the most cutting edge use cases, right, across verticals. And India is very, very innovative in terms of doing it in a very cost effective manner as well. Like they do really well. And I see this compared to other Asia geographies, right? And then you would also have the other extreme, which are potentially maybe slower to adopt, take low risk reputation use cases internally, for example. So I think of it as in terms of three shifts, right? First, I think the nature of work in itself is definitely changing. AI moves from being a tool that you operate to a collaborator you delegate with, which means like every team is going to have AI agent co-workers in that sense, right? And therefore, the premium skill therefore becomes more of directing, verifying, orchestrating versus just doing yourself, right? Like that's something which you have to think about. Second, I truly think that India has to scale broadly and not just deeply, right? Which means not just the next 10 million engineers, but hundreds of millions of people who are AI fluent, and that in their own context and in their own language as well, right? Like meeting them where they are. And third, something which I see a lot in the field is the constraint increasingly is not the model, it's the change management and the trust. So if you look at organizations which adopt AI, both of this needs to happen consistently, right? And it comes back to the point you mentioned around, a large number of employees feel that AI is disrupting their jobs. And therefore, what they end up doing is they do the learning informally on their own. I truly think organizations will win when they move from that one-off AI literacy to a tiered role-based upskilling. So that's my bottom line, that AI can and will narrow the opportunity gap, but only if we build for the next 500 million users and not just the next 50 million. So that would be my take to this.
Thank you, Ranjana. Shom, you're also talking to enterprises, especially large enterprises that are starting to adopt AI, right? Has that adoption moved beyond experimentation? Has it moved out of the sandbox to real world use cases where it's already delivering results? Or is this still very much the experimentation phase, cautious experimentation, or let's say cautious deployment at best?
So thanks for that question. So I think I'll echo a lot of points that Ranjani just mentioned. See, again, to the question of who is experimenting and who is scaling, it's as she said, it's a barbell. So I would say in India at the moment, the number of organizations which are experimenting far exceed the number of organizations that are scaling. But we are at the cusp of an inflection point here. And what I see is that most of the scaling challenges usually are revolving around a few key issues, right? And the first is essentially, again, going back to what Ranjani said, the fact that we are hyper value conscious. I won't say cost conscious, but value conscious. So one of the biggest challenges is that in India, enterprises start first with an outcome question. So the first question that we usually get is that what needle will this AI implementation move for my operating metrics or my financial metrics, right? And the problem comes when they expect very clear answers, right? Because at least in the time that I have spent in this field, there are no clear answers to this question, which is something that can be transposed from one customer to the other. So what usually we end up suggesting customers is that you have a real options mindset, in the sense that you invest more as you learn more. And it is a fact that AI is expensive today. So, especially in the Indian context, scaling will require customers to choose, wisely, right? The second big problem that we see is that most people who are experimenting, they're looking at AI as a bolt-on technology. Essentially, they are looking at it as a band-aid that can put into broken processes or processes where there is significant wait time. But very few are actually looking at AI as a technology that removes constraints, right? Because most enterprises work under constraints. And today you have a technology class which can absolutely unconstrained several of those constraints. So you don't have to deal with things like scarcity of working hours. You don't have to deal with scarcity of expert knowledge. So what separates the ones who are experimenting and the ones who are scaling is the fact that the ones who are scaling are looking at AI as fundamentally a technology that will re-engineer their processes rather than using it as a bolt-on. And also, the third thing is the scaling challenge is trust, right? Which is more around governance and trust. Because, see, for those of us who have been in technology, things like governance and trust, these tend to be non-functional requirements, as we call it, right? But I think with AI, these have become core capabilities. And one big gap that I see between the ones who are experimenting and the ones who are scaling is the fact that the ones who are scaling have built in-house governance talent, which means they have experts today who know how to write a responsible AI policy for their organization. Whereas the ones who are experimenting don't have such teams and they depend on wisdom from outside. And finally, I would like to end by saying that the big challenge today, especially in the mid caps and the small cap enterprises in India, is that the middle level managers don't have AI fluency. Therefore, that impacts change management, that impacts surfacing of use cases, which can then be, coalesced, and a scaling plan can be built around them. So I think, going back to this point that Anjani made, that we have to start looking at AI as a colleague at work. So one of the things that we do, for example, is for a lot of enterprises, we organize something called AI immersion sessions, where we get the mid-level management and teach them how to prompt. And from prompt, we teach them how to do a deep research. And from deep research, we tell them how to build a PRD for an idea they have. So building AI fluency, I think, is again something which will help Indian enterprises scale. So these are essentially the challenges that we are seeing in Indian enterprises when they try to scale. Now, of course, there are many other technical challenges, but these tend to be the primary ones. Back to you, Sumit.
And Alpan, if that is the case with India's largest enterprises, and there at least you have a very well-established financial and operational metrics to tell you if you're moving in the right direction or not. It's easy to say work did not work. How does that picture change when you try and apply this to the social sector? Right? In any case, we are debating metrics 90% of the time. No two people can agree on what is the right metric to go after. On top of that, you're bringing in a new technology. How do you build? How do you build for the bottom of the pyramid?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a question that we've struggled with since the beginning of our inception, since when we started about 8 years ago. Does AI even make sense for the bottom of the pyramid? If it does, then what is the context? Right. So these are some of the fundamental questions. And in fact, we ask these questions every time we are faced with a potential AI, use case in quotes. Is AI the right technology to solve this problem? Because as Sankha mentioned, AI is an expensive technology. I would argue it actually operates under a lot of constraints because you need massive amounts of data. You need to keep retraining it because of drift and issues like that. You need expensive people to build the AI. So does it even make sense, right? One of the way we operate is we look at the problem, the social problem that has to be solved. It could be a health challenge. It could be a logistics challenge. It could be as simple as, our students sort of reading fluently, and can we address that using AI? So, we work on 30 plus projects, and in each project we ask this question: does AI make sense? Right. So that's the first thing. We need to establish that. Once we establish that, then the second question is, do we have data that represents the on-the-ground situation? See, people in the academic literature as well as in industry people often have access to clean data sets. There are benchmark data sets. There's data collected from the internet, which can be often cleaned up, or if it's not cleanable, then you have it at such a scale that it doesn't really matter. Whereas when we look at data from the ground, it's rarely clean data. So it doesn't make sense to train models on clean data. You have to train them on data that's representative of what the model is going to see during inference, right? So these are some of the challenges. But again, I sort of totally echo what Sunita said. The opportunity space, the amount of low-hanging fruit for applying AI and applying small AI models. I'm not talking about Gen AI. Actually, I think Gen AI is massive overkill for most of the problems that India has. Right? I actually worry about overuse of Gen AI and over reliance on Gen AI. Without experts in the loop, so to speak. So I'm really talking about small AI models that fit on device, that work for communities that don't have access to the internet. Because if you build models that sit on the cloud, you're actually not closing the digital divide, you're enhancing it. So you need models that sit on device, that are adapted to very, very specific tasks that work well for those tasks, and that we can build in-house as a non-profit. So this is really sort of our focus area. So we build predictive models, we build vision models, we build models that operate on audio streams, and so on. And these are all separate models. We don't have a big generic foundation model that takes care of all of this. I don't know if that answers your question, but
absolutely does. In fact, I have a follow-on.
With these types of models, you can achieve impact, and we've shown that, we've experienced that. And you have to be careful though with the whole process, the way you construct these models and making sure that they work on the ground.
So I have a follow-on question, just to make this much more real for everybody who's listening to this, right? Can you give me one example of a use case that you're truly excited about because AI is making a real difference, doing things you could not have done earlier? And one example of a use case where you evaluated and came up with the answer saying AI is not the right thing for this. Not worth it.
Sure. How much time do I have?
As much as you want.
Use case, there's several of them, but a more recent project that we've been working on is one of the things that, one of the areas that we work in is tuberculosis and addressing India's tuberculosis burden. As people may know, India has one of the highest TB burdens in the world. In spite of the fact that TB has been a curable disease for the last 100 years, right? So unlike COVID, TB is actually curable, but we have a very high TB burden. We have a lot of TB deaths. Now, there's several reasons for this that I don't want to get into, but one of the reasons is a lack of diagnosis. People are not diagnosed with TB. There are taboos around TB, which prevent this. And there are also other constraints. For example, one of the classic ways to screen for TB is by taking a chest X-ray of a patient. Chest X-rays are not readily available in rural areas. So we looked at other possibilities where we can use a very simple method of screening that is not reliant on an X-ray machine. Right, and typically we experiment with methods that are usable with a simple Android smartphone, as simple as possible, that are usable in rural areas without internet. Right, so these were sort of our constraints, and so what we've been working on is a screening AI for TB that uses cough sounds as input. So these are patient-solicited cough sounds. The patient wears a mask. Coughs 3 times in the vicinity of a mobile phone, and it's a very simple output. The app tells you whether they need to tells the patient whether they need to go for a confirmatory test or not. If the app says no, then with high confidence they don't have TB. Right? If the app says yes, then with reasonable confidence they have TB, but they still need to go for a confirmatory test. Right? So it's a screening app, and so I'm very excited about this. This is eminently usable in the field. It performs much better than the standard screening procedure that's used in the field, which is, people are asked questions like, do you have symptoms? Have you been coughing? Have you lost weight? Do you have fevers? Do you have night sweats? Things like that. So this technology works much better than having a simple rule-based method where you ask these questions and elicit responses. And it's almost equally easy to use because you still have to enter this data into a mobile phone, so you need a mobile phone. And all this uses is a mobile phone, and the additional ingredient is a mask.
Yeah, incredible.
So I'm very excited about this because I think the AI is working reasonably well, and it's getting better as we develop it. Now, you also asked for an example where things don't quite pan out, right? One of our earliest projects was, trying to predict pest infestations in cotton farms. I mean, cotton farms, one of the biggest problems is pest infestations. And once pests come in, cotton is a cash crop. They just sort of, completely eradicate the entire farm, and the farmer becomes destitute. There are lots of farmer suicides associated with this. So we said, can we sort of anticipate a pest attack in advance? And we developed what we thought was a pretty cool AI solution where you put a pest trap in the field, empty the contents of the trap on a piece of paper, take a picture of that paper, and the AI counts the different types of pests, the different types of dust particles, things like that. Based on this information, the AI gives a recommendation on whether the farmer needs to spray pesticide or not. So this prevents excessive use of pesticide spraying, for no reason. And in fact, it works quite well. Now, it works quite well in the lab, in the sense that the model works quite well, the AI. But in the field, the biggest challenge is actually for a farmer to get hold of a white piece of paper.
Wow.
On which you can sprinkle, the contents of the trap, which was an important part of the solution, right? It turned out that with a soiled piece of paper, the AI got confused. We've revisited this problem several times. Or even, carrying a piece of paper in the farm is not a normal thing that a farmer does, right? So for reasons like this, which have nothing to do with AI and nothing to do with data, but practical reasons like this, your technology may fail. And so we have not been able to scale this up to the level that we would have liked. It sort of got stuck in pilotitis. But we learned a very important lesson from things like this.
Thank you for sharing those incredible examples, Alpan. I think that just makes everything so much more tangible on where things actually stand. I'm going to come back to you, Sunita. When we're applying AI, or for that matter, any technology, for people who are fundamentally marginalized, issues of inclusivity, issues of accuracy just become so much larger. Right? It's not about the next reel that we'll see on an algorithm. It's also about, will somebody get denied a direct benefit transfer because their identity was not correctly established, right? Just taking a very extreme example. What, in your mind, are things that both policy and practitioners need to take care of when they're rolling out this technology, especially for the marginalized communities?
Yeah, actually, first I would like to really, appreciate what Alpan said, that I think the biggest challenge is deciding purposeful use cases of AI. And, Alpan mentioned some examples, and I think that is the first thing. It's not a technology problem, but all policy makers first need to decide for a given societal problem in terms of priorities and available solutions, where does AI rank? We don't want to go overboard. We are not, technology should not be pushing solutions. The policy maker should be deciding the best solution, and AI may or may not be the best solution. So let's assume now that we have decided that AI is the solution for a particular problem. Then I think the first step, and this is not what is done often, is to create a benchmark. Once you create a benchmark, I have worked with banks and a few other organizations, and we start with very good intentions, but we don't know what is their concrete problem. How is it that existing models and algorithms do not solve their problems? But if they can do this tedious, unglamorous task of creating a benchmark then that is like a honeypot for researchers, not just in India, but even outside India. If, say, our government officials create, say, 20 India specific benchmarks of decent size, we can create these enticing leaderboards, and people from the world over would want to provide solutions. And then, of course, there will be challenges like collecting data, local data, but very often, if your goal is to create cost effective models on the ground, you can also distill the learnings or wisdom which is there in larger models. It works for some cases but not for others. But there are people along, researchers and database researchers, machine learning researchers, policy researchers in the entire stack, where once a benchmark exists, the rest of the solutions will follow. There are enough busybodies. It's just that most of us don't know what will be good to solve in the first place. So identifying the use case, and once you identify the use case, you will also identify the corner cases. And then creating, then people will also do research on identifying the OOD region. So in machine learning, if your deployment scenario matches your training scenarios, then you get very decent accuracy. Otherwise, you might just totally fall off the cliff. So if there is a benchmark, then people will also be able to solve these problems of calibration, of identifying when human intervention is required. And because there have been a few horror stories where large number of people have been denied benefits because their card could not be read by an AI model. So but on the other hand, if we had first started out by creating a representative benchmark, even before anybody talks about procuring any AI model, they should first create a benchmark. And then there are a bunch of solutions. Of course, at some point you need to collect data, but you can create, in some cases, at least some part of the data can be synthetic, or you can do distillation, and maybe you can even create methods which do continual learning, within context learning and other online adaptation methods you can learn on the ground. And of course, initially it has to be human in the loop, which is a polite way of saying that you're not confident about your AI model. So it has to be done gracefully and gradually, and we have to be humble and honest about the failing of the AI models.
Yeah. So, very, very fair point, Sunita. Very fair point. Also, I'm going to request you, as I come back to you in just a bit, you'll need to come even closer to the microphone, I think, because your voice was again starting to dip a little bit. But we could hear what you said just now.
Okay, sure.
I'm going to move to Ranjani. We're talking use cases, right? When we take that to the industry context, which are the sectors, which are the industries that are actually leading this charge? Everybody's talking about it, but who are the ones who are actually making use of it even if it's not scaled to its eventual goal, at least it shows evidence of scaling to some extent, right? There is excitement around it.
Yeah, no, I'll talk about it in maybe two parts, Sumit, right? Like one, just in terms of where do you see value, and then also the evolution, which I think is important to understand. Now, first of all, when you think about what does ready look like, right? Like my test for ready probably has like 3 areas I would think about, right? First, is there a large unmet need? Like to the point which Sunita and Alpan are starting off, I'm a very big problem first, tech second person, right? You start with the problem and then bring in the tech. I think that's important. And then do you have digital rails in place? And do you have a data which exists, right? I think all of that needs to come together for it to move from pilot to production. I'll give you an actual example, right? Like this is one of the largest FSIs in India, and it's public as well, so you can go read up, right? So they actually shared this in one of their earnings calls recently last quarter. We built out this AI agent solution, voice solution for them, where today they have almost 2 crore, which is like 20 million customer calls converting voice to text. And that is generating almost like 100,000 new loan offers, right, from data which they did not have before. So it's essentially like a complete AI-powered call center agent, which is dispersing like almost 1,500 crore of loans in one single quarter, right? Like that's 10% of the overall disbursement happens through AI. right? And this is massive scale, like hundreds of millions of calls, which happens through AI. So all of this is actual, real, on the ground happening, right? That so if you were to ask me, like, where do you see the most traction in terms of a space, voice is a very big space for India, like given the market in itself, right? And especially in terms of verticals, FSI, financial services, is a great place where there is, and you wouldn't expect it, right? Given the amount of data privacy and residency. Of course, that is still important, but having said that, I think they do adopt, and they adopt really well. Of course, multilingual real-time voice is a challenge, and that is something which unlocks population level scale, right? So that I definitely feel like that's a very good sector. I think the other part of it to also understand is how do we evolve? How does enterprises evolve, right? If you think about just like 2 years ago, how customers started with evolution, most of them would start with a use case approach, right? Say, I want to build out a HR bot. I want to build out an employee chat with your data kind of use case. It's very simple individual use cases. I want to build out returns. So e-commerce firms will want to build out returns using computer vision, for example. These are individual use cases. What you do see shifting, especially with key enterprises, is a shift to platform as a strategy. See, think about it. If I'm building agents, to build one agent is one thing. To scale it to 10,000 agents requires a completely different strategy. That's a platform strategy, which includes not just the models, but the entire end-to-end layer, right? Like, what's the observability around it? What's the governance around it? How am I tracking my cost? How is it scaling? All of that becomes important. So you look at it as a platform. What also becomes important is context, right? So see, it's very easy to connect it and build a RAG system. But if you think about real processes and that's where AI fails, right? AI doesn't fail just because of, like, it is design, not necessarily technology. It's easy to just connect and get it from a PDF document. But if you think about a process like sales approval, that information comes from several sources. Now, suddenly there could be a Slack ping where someone pings some information and then that gets approved. All of those are exceptions. So that context, intelligence, which powers the model is what defines the outcomes. And that's where the organizations which actually make AI work, think about it as a platform and how do you bring all of that together. So that's where I'd see it going, right? Now, coming back to what it means for us in terms of sectors, areas I am very passionate about is like healthcare. Like I really like the examples which Alpan and Sunita shared, right? Because this is a very real outside of enterprises. So I think AI-led drug discovery could be a huge space to cut down R&D costs, for example, right? And the reason I think India can move faster is because of the rails underneath, like UPI, which is running like millions of transactions, billions of transactions, in fact, per month, right? And the number of other identities you have. So my bottom line is, if you layer AI on infra, which already exists, that reaches 1 billion people, you don't catch up, you tend to leapfrog. And that's where I would probably invest my efforts there.
Shank, a lot of your work is also very India specific, India, Middle East, and I'm guessing India is the lion's share of it, right? What are the practical challenges that you're seeing as people are trying to scale up or deploy AI at much larger volumes than what they were doing, let's say 6-8 months back? Are we seeing evidence of scale up, first of all, happening? And this could apply to projects for agri or health or education, and it could equally apply to projects for customer service, sales, or any of the other processes, right? What's been your experience?
No, so as I did address this point, see, scale-ups are happening, but it is limited to organizations of a certain size and certain sectors. So scale-ups are definitely happening in financial services as a space, especially in the private banking sector. Scale-ups are happening in big pharma, big manufacturing, but the vast majority of businesses in this country are still waiting and watching and experimenting. But if I go back to because part of my portfolio is also public sector, which is the government, all central governments and state governments, and there I see something magical happening because I see tremendous appetite in the ministries, in the state governments in adopting AI in all kinds of use cases, right? So, and I can maybe give a very cute example of a state government, which actually where a TCS team built a kind of a computer vision model that Sunita was talking about, and the application was very, very interesting, right? So this state government is the government of Andhra Pradesh. They realized that the biggest cause of dropout of girl child in schools was because of unhygienic toilets and restrooms. So one of the things that we built for the government of Andhra Pradesh is a mobile-based, computer vision aided app where you take a picture of a school washroom, and at the district level and at the state level, the data is consolidated about how clean that washroom is. And as a result of that, now you can imagine that you see a chief minister's dashboard and he gets a health indicator of how clean the washrooms in his schools are. And using that, they actually diverted a lot of funds and interventions which kept these washrooms clean and ultimately ended up increasing the retention of girl children or girl child in these schools in Andhra Pradesh. So again, so if you really look at it, government, the public sector in India is massively buying and implementing AI, but there is a catch, right? The catch is that this AI has to be sovereign, right? And so therefore comes the friction, because a lot of the best frontier models are not open weight, and a lot of them run on servers which are not in the in the Indian territory. So a big sort of a trend that I see is that India, which is the government, state governments, also PSU enterprises, and parts of private sector which are regulated, there is a huge trend now for sovereign AI, and that is where some of the scaling limitations are also starting to emerge, because while we are building compute power on infra at a very rapid pace, but there is a lot of problems we see with the latest frontier models which cannot be hosted on-prem, and that is where we see some scaling problems, right? So I mean, just to summarize, the kind of scaling difference you see differs by industry and differs by size of the enterprise. But the bright spot here is the public sector, which is essentially buying AI or floating AI RFPs and projects at a massive scale, at an unprecedented scale. Yeah.
We are almost at the end of our time, but before we wrap this up, I'm going to float one common question for all of you. Right? 2047 Viksit Bharat is this benchmark put out there, which is helping align a lot of planning timelines across the country, right? It's actually ended up aligning a lot of action that might have otherwise been happening in its own silos. 20 years is a lifetime, especially for a technology that's evolving so fast, right? So I don't know if you can look 20 years into the future, but if you really had to, let's forget the 20 years, but if you really had to look as far as in the future as you would like to, and if you had to put out an aspiration for what you wish AI would do for India, right? And try and make it as specific as possible, right? What you wish AI would do for India, either in a specific space or sector or type of work or type of community, what would that be? And maybe we start with Sunita, Ranjani, Shank, and Alpan.
Yeah, Actually, I would think of like remote healthcare for, to bridge the rural urban divide on the terms of access to medical services.
I think that's a good one, Sunita. You see, I think there are like four things which needs to kind of come together, right? Like one, especially for India, language and accessibility, building for Indian languages, making it voice first, so that even like the low literacy users, right, can have inclusivity. I think that's very important. Safety and fairness, and that should be by design as a default, right? That's my second. Inclusion in terms of who builds it, so that the data and the teams that build it reflect the diversity. And maybe the last part, which is like partnership across all the actors, right? Like across the ecosystem in itself. I think those 4 points coming together is what I think would pave us to the path to the 2047.
Shank?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say beyond what is said, but I'll just say that maybe, I think by 2047, if AI were to, do something, it should be that it lifts every last person in every last mile. So I think both economically, in terms of economic outcomes, educational outcomes, and health outcomes. Because if something that AI could do, I think that would be something that it should aim for in the next 20 years.
Yeah,
Would you open?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I don't have a specific wish list for what I think AI should do. I mean, thinking about it as a technology, as a tool, I'm more sort of, my wish is more that, our data systems across India be cleaned up, be made, digitization should be a smooth process. While respecting data privacy, while respecting, individual privacy and so on. But with that caveat, digitization across the country, we have the largest population in the world, we have the most diverse population in the world, we have the most multilingual population in the world. Data from this population and the kinds of insights you will be able to get from this data, if it existed in digital form, would be game changing. I mean, we would be able to develop technologies indigenously that don't exist anywhere else in the world. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
And if I could add maybe 2 cents on top of all of that wonderful input is, at least in the philanthropy space and in the giving space, a very common thing that we often say is we are a rich country with a lot of poor people. It's a rich world with a lot of poor people, right? The total volume of resources is not the problem. Allocation is. And I think when I look at AI somewhere, and I'm no expert, but somewhere it does look like there is a possibility that the barriers to usage may actually drop to a point where digital inequality or economic inequality actually doesn't widen. It may even reduce. Many barriers to that, but such is life. But thank you so much for all of the time and all of those inputs that you've all brought to the table today. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, and thank you for keeping it so precise and candid. It was an absolute delight to be talking to all of you. I'm going to hand it over to you, Aparna.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you so much, and thank you to this very distinguished panel with us today. We've had such great examples, use cases of how AI is going to show great impact in the social space. Thank you so much for being part of this panel discussion of the India at 100 Foundation, and also I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of the Secretary of the Foundation, Ms. Vaishali Srivastava, who's also joined us here today. Thank you for engaging with us, and we look forward to more opportunities to hear from you in the future.
Thank you, Aparna.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Take care, Shank,
Thank you.
Sunita, Ranjini, and Arpan.
Thank you.
You.
Bye.